This is John Consemulder, your radio host for today. And again, we have a very special guest, an international guest, so that's why I'm not speaking Dutch, but I'm trying to speak coherent English here. We have the esteemed guest, Mr. Dan Winter, who, and this is a personal honor, I might say, came to do this radio show with me about his great work. For the readers and the listeners who do not know the work of Mr. Dan Winter, please visit his website www.goldenmean.info, and another one is www.fractalfield.com. Here's a little bit of a bio I found which might be interesting about Dan Winter. Dan Winter's background is as multifaceted as his viewpoint. Graduating with honors from the University of Detroit, Dan pursued graduate studies in psychophysiology and the origin of languages. In addition to his academic background, he has worked as a systems analyst with IBM, an industrial metallurgist and crystallographer. That's not a nice word to speak if you're Dutch. He has undertaken many diverse studies, from quantum physics to modeling at the MIT Space Lab, to developing the early biofeedback prototype equipment as Dr. Albert Axe's protege. Widely traveled, Dan has sojourned to study at the Gurdjieff School of Sacred Gymnastics in Florence with Buckminster Fuller, the Gizeh Pyramids, Israel, the Andes, and at Findhorn. Dan is an accomplished keyboard artist. I didn't know that. As a music producer, I think this is nice to hear for the first time. And was once a church organist and choir director, all before reaching high school. He delights in playing computer keyboard music using sonic samples taken from biological events, heart sounds, whale and dolphin sounds, etc. His creative side emerges as playfulness with ideas which can be shared at different levels. In the 1980s, he founded an alternative newspaper entitled The Network of Light. He established a learning center experiment in collective bioharmony, I think this is fascinating, called Crystal Hill Farm. At Crystal Hill, Dan's extensive network grew as he hosted conferences with a prolific list of presenters on varied topics from sacred geometry to sustainable ecosystems. He maintained an elaborate computer music video facility where his computer-animated videos on sacred geometry and New Age physics evolved. While directing Crystal Hill, Dan was vice president and technical director of SS Electric Inc. in Buffalo, which markets his engineered three-phase conversion motor technology around the country. By the early 90s, Dan relocated in the Blue Ridge Mountains and founded the St. Graal School of Sacred Geometry and the Biodome Healing Center located in Waynesville, North Carolina. He has helped inspire many projects, including the group Planet Heart Biofeedback, the Timeless Architecture Conference series with Henry McLean, the Reviving Ancient Wisdoms Conference and Compendium with the Fifth Way Mystery School, and through the years Dan has lectured on the evolution of consciousness, and this is, which I think is fascinating, on the evolution of consciousness, sacred geometry, and coherent emotion at many national and international conferences. His theories in coherent emotion inspired the notable research at Millar Fillmore Hospital in Buffalo and the Heart Math Institute in California in the mid-90s. Result published by Dr. Glenn Ryan, and then I just interviewed Dr. Glenn Ryan for 2 hours a few days ago, so that's a fascinating synchronicity. Provided conclusive evidence supporting Dan's heart entrainment theories. The effect of coherent ordering of the heart harmonics during the feeling of compassion was measured replicably, so we could do it again and again, affecting the braiding and the programming of DNA. And then there's also the Heartbeat Earth Project and your unique theory on gravity, and I suppose also free energy and anti-gravity for that sake, but this is going to be a very long intro, of course. So, welcome to the show.
Well, it's sort of fun to hear all that stuff. It's all true and fun. But most of it's about 15 years old, but that's okay. Go right ahead.
but it's still true, probably. So that's good. Okay. Well, the first thing I want to ask you, because a lot of people I personally know are fascinated by your work, but maybe it's good for the general audience to give a clear explanation of what, in your view, is implosion physics and what can it teach us?
Yes, I pioneered at international physics conferences the teaching that golden ratio fractality is the electric cause of gravity, also sometimes called phase conjugation. And in addition to that being the cause of gravity, it's the electric symmetry and cause of perception, of bliss. It's the origin of color and time. So the physics of all centripetal and self-organizing forces depends on understanding golden ratio fractality, in my view. And I see that as the central science which can really lead us out of the path of chaos. So that's a core issue in my view.
Okay. Well, I think it's fascinating that your work is indeed very multifaceted as you are. You talk about DNA and the work of spirals, electromagnetism, peace, consciousness, law, phi, golden ratio, fractals, crystals, sacred geometry, bliss, gravity, vortexes. Now, because everything is so much related, of course, to the power of consciousness and intent and coherence, maybe it's good to have your view, because I didn't find it in the material I had here. How do you view, and of course these are not simple questions to answer, but how do you view the mind or the soul and its relationship to consciousness? So what do you think of consciousness in general? The hard question, so to speak. What is consciousness?
Right. Well, as we do this radio interview, I'd like to say that the summary position here, what links all those fields together, first of all, is one simple idea. Is one simple idea, and that is that one particular kind of electric field, which is fractal or a phase conjugate dielectric, which invites compression. That particular kind of electric field that produces charge distribution and life and consciousness is particularly at the center of every subject I ever discuss. For example, the definition of making peace, in my view, is only that self-organization that proceeds from a fractal field. The definition of expanded consciousness is only the definition of the electric field that can be distributed because it's fractal. So it is my view that there is one central symmetry operation which underlies every single self-organizing force. And basically this idea that fractally optimized compression is the specific and only solution to virtually every mystery in both physics and spirituality.
Well, in that case, I think it's interesting for the general listeners to maybe explain in broad terms what a fractal is and what this fractal distribution is, because it relates to everything.
Yes.
What is a fractal in your terms?
Well, we tell people, if you want to imagine a fractal, just visualize a rose or an onion or a fern or a pine cone, where the inside looks like the outside. It is more than just the mathematics of perfect compression. That's only important because it's the electric field of perfect compression, and therefore the cause of life. For example, if you take your seeds to a Stonehenge-like structure, you will find a 30 to 50% replicable improvement in germination and growth. And the reason is because the electric field there has produced life. We know what that electric field is. It's called fractal. And it produces perfected distribution, the way waves work, if you were to imagine the electric field being the face of a rose. And that perfects the distribution, optimized constructive wave interference, always perfected by golden ratio. And that is the central principle which underlies everything we teach.
Okay, now you're mentioning interference, and I had a talk on the radio with Roger Nelson, and we talked about the signal to noise ratio of what's actually being measured in global consciousness. And I told him that I thought that the noise might be as interesting as the signal, because in the noise there might be, let's say, as a simple example, there might be a peak experience of human consciousness, a very positive development, and there might be a phase conjugate, so to speak, negative development. And if we just have to, of course we don't have just two events in the world at any particular time, but let's say for this example there's one positive event and one even stronger but with a different polarity, a negative event. It would cancel out and maybe it becomes scalar electromagnetics, but in the noise we would call it a zero and not information, but actually it's the cancelling out of two very important pieces of information. So what I thought was interesting, you talk about constructive interference, which of course becomes resonance and amplification of two waves which are in phase and aligned to and attuned to each other. And it's important in your work. So what, in your view, is the secret of remaining in coherence, so to speak, and constructive interference?
Well, I appreciate that you like with this global coherence project. Is Roger Nelson associated with the Princeton Noosphere thing?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. Well, I don't think they realize that what they're measuring is a simple capacitive wave that, although they're using a Josephson junction, you can do the same thing with a simple 25-cent capacitor, as the Hodowanek and Ramsey work proved, the way you can measure gravity waves with 25 cents instead of 20 billion. But so it's a simple when charge moves in a phase conjugate or between frequencies, sometimes called scalar, you get that compression effect, and that produces constructive compression, which was Einstein's definition of gravity for charge. And that, what Einstein didn't know was that golden ratio is the solution to constructive compression. So once we kind of understand that, then we see that the signal to noise issue is the same issue as any definition of, say, good or evil or the divine versus bad, which is that wave of charge which produces constructive interference, obviously idealized by golden ratio, we define as divine or good, and any wave that produces destructive wave interference, we define as evil. And so, for example, defining sacred space or peacemaking and all that kind of stuff, if you simply measure the fractality of the space electrically, and you can do it with air, all you're measuring is charge distribution perfected by golden ratio and fractality. So, signal to noise, it ultimately becomes a question of what wave is going to survive and what wave isn't. For example, when you die, it's very measurable that your plasma goes somewhere, and it goes to the place of power called fractal, and that enables the distribution of charge that is defined as divine immortality, as in where the Hopi ancestors live on old Oribe, they're inhabiting a fractal field. And so all of these definitions, for example, the definition of immortality or life or the divine, come down to one simple principle, and that is, which is the geometry of a wave of charge that allows it to propagate infinitely and therefore sustainably. In fact, the only definition of sustainability. And the word infinitely has the answer in finitely. It's had golden ratio distribution. It's a cellular dodeca. And that's the geometry of the electric field we use to make a 50 and 300% growth effect. So again, we have only one principle to discuss here, and it's called the fractal field.
So if I hear this, I'm thinking, my next question was going to be, what is it that makes certain geometries so sacred? And, yes. and of course that's an important question to be answered, but it sounds as if, we shouldn't call it sacred geometry, but superconducting geometry in a way.
Well, the word sacred means a fractal electric field, sustainable, and that is precisely, that's the actual specific molecular physics of how you make a superconductor. Nassim and I agree on this. When you jitterbug tetracellular Hubacta, you become dodeca ecosa. And that's how both molecules and atoms become superconductors. For example, a monofilament of DNA or gold. And the way they become a superconductor is because they get fractal spin path through zero center point by golden ratio, as I proved in my hydrogen equations. So, again, here's the practical example for the non-scientist. When, the tribal shaman finds the right place to talk to his ancestors, and Korotkov measured this, it's always the place where the air is electrically fractal. And that ability to communicate the distribution of charge, which Jung called the collective unconscious, is always and only specifically coherence perfected by fractality. So once you know that coherence, a distributable wave, is only perfected by fractality and golden ratio, you have one central animating principle defining even the word animus, meaning soul, that wave which does succeed in propagating.
This is what I think is so fascinating in your work. I've written a book about what I call the holographic reality and a multidimensional reality, so a lot of resonance with your work, but so to speak, in simple terms, the world of sound, light, and energy in a multidimensional universe. But what I did not come about in my own research, that it's being propagated, this field effect and this non-local energetics of information transfer, through some kind of sacred geometry principle. Of course, I know the work of Hans Jenny and the cymatics. I write about that, and it's all vibration. But which I think is fascinating, that you have this philosophy, so to speak, of the golden ratio. And how does that relate to, because it's a unique theory you have, how does this philosophy of the golden ratio relate to gravity and even bliss? Can you explain that to the listeners?
Well, it's very simple. A golden ratio is the cause of gravity and bliss. There, I'm done now. No.
Wow, now I have to look at another question very soon. No, please continue.
But no, it's really literally true. You know, Nassim, he tripped over, Nassim Haramein, the Resonance Project, he tripped over beautifully how golden ratio is the universal scaling law for all of matter. He calls it black hole, the mechanism of all creation, golden ratio, phi and universal scaling. I wrote the equation that proved that hydrogen was golden ratio, Planck length times golden ratio, equals the 3 radii, which are golden ratio of hydrogen. And of course, we know the reason atoms and planets and people have a centripetal electric field called gravity is because their inside is fractal to their outside. And that same golden ratio is what you measure in EEG when people have peak perception, which is called bliss or enlightenment if you're not selling it to bank managers. So no matter how you shape the story here, the animating principle is the fractality provided by golden ratio. And I'm not speaking new age woo-woo physics here. I'm speaking the kind of physics we are going to teach to the PhDs at their universities. This is the replacement, and I do mean replacement for Einstein's mistake. Einstein was right. Infinite non-destructive compression is the cause of gravity. But nobody ever told him what a fractal is, and he knew that golden ratio is the solution to wave interference, and therefore the solution to compression. He knew that the solution to compression was but it's just simply stupid that he didn't realize the golden ratio was the solution to compression. It was simple stupidity.
But how stupid was it? Because how did you come about with this finding?
Stupid, because it's horribly stupid. In fact, it's so stupid, it threatens the survival of every living thing on this planet. But because Einstein did not know why an object falls to the ground, and your average physicist is equally stupid, he doesn't know how to fix the gravity field of the planet, and therefore the atmosphere is going away and the sun's about to toast us. So I would say, yes, very stupid.
No, but I mean stupid, of course, in an ecological and a human catastrophe sense. That's logical, of course. But how simple was it for you to find out that it was all about this principle?
I think a 5-year-old could have explained it to Mr. Einstein pretty well. You take golden ratio and you notice perfected wave interference, maximum constructive wave interference. And you can prove it with just, a 2-cent experiment. And once you know that that's the solution to compression. And Einstein was right. Infinite compression is a solution to unified field. He just didn't know what infinite compression was because he didn't understand golden ratio. And that is a incredibly stupid, backward, dumb thing not to know.
So this is the secret principle. Of course, they also teach in mystery schools, but Einstein didn't know.
There is no secret here. No, it's
not anymore.
I insist on this. It's not that I'm smart. It's that they are stupid. It doesn't take brilliance to know that golden ratio solves wave compression. It does not require brilliance to know that. And once you do know that, then Einstein did not have a mystery. Infinite compression is the solution to gravity, and now we know what it is, which he didn't, because he didn't know what golden ratio does. And that's behind L. Nashi's physics of E8 and all these new quantum golden ratio stuff. It's very simple. Solution to wave interference equals solution to compression. It is not complicated. I will not let anyone tell me this is complicated, because it ain't.
I won't for sure.
Okay.
What I do want to add, my question is it is it a subconscious stupidity or a conscious stupidity? And what I mean is, of course, if there's a real life ether physics kind of explanation to energy and gravity, it might also be possible to come upon the field of free energy and anti-gravity. So might it also be that some kind of withdrawal of scientific facts have been used to prohibit this outcome, that there is free energy and that we actually have anti-gravity possibilities?
Well, I suppose the key to self-empowerment, the key to, for example, whether or not you will take memory through death is whether your aura as electric plasma charge cloud is centripetal. And your aura will not be centripetal and therefore able to steer when you dream or die unless you have golden ratio fractality, sometimes called bliss or getting sacred. And, maybe Einstein was a little reluctant to know that, but maybe racially we're a little reluctant to know that. But once we do understand that, it's how our electric field as plasma charge, sometimes called the aura, meaning gold AU, which means phase conjugate, Arian, Orion. So when we achieve that, we become the definition of self-empowerment. When we don't achieve that, which is also sometimes called bliss, becoming centripetal, then we are still a parasite. And so any culture that doesn't know how gravity is made, and therefore centripetal forces in general, is by definition parasitic. And so those cultures might use a word called free for the energy sources that come from phase conjugate dielectrics. But when they use words like free energy, it means that they don't know how to use it, because it ain't free. Free energy is absolutely the wrong term here. Yes, a phase conjugate dielectric will exchange charge with the gravitational field, but there's absolutely nothing free about that.
Okay. So talking about phase conjugates is not a question I wrote down, but just comes to mind right now. Does your work in any way relate to the work of, for instance, Tom Bearden's work on phase conjugation?
Tom and I were on the same lecture circuit for many years. It's too bad he's kind of getting a bit frail now, but our friend Bill Donovan's still working with him. I find some of Tom's earlier work on the scalar had a little bit too much on the fear side, perhaps. By the way, I feel the word scalar or proportional are imprecise terms for a phase conjugate field. But Tom Bearden's more recent writings on how a phase conjugate dielectric is bioactive, in my view, is very, very useful and wonderful. And I wish he was more active and able to pursue this with us. But indirectly, he's in dialogue. I summarize that at goldenmean.info/phase conjugate. But indeed, what's happening specifically as the waves, if you visualize a caduceus, as they add and multiply their phase velocity, what's called scalar, which is now phase conjugate, they produce a charge propagation velocity, which is superluminal. And the reason that defines bioactive field, for example, the field effect made by DNA, which defines the collective unconscious, is because that is what initiates charge distribution perfected. And we've gone a lot, in my view, a ways past Tom Bearden's work, since I'm producing phase conjugate dielectric fields all the time, and I have produced a 50% effect on fermentation, for example, with simply that as a capacitor. No power input. Just put that fermenting, brewer's yeast or bread yeast inside that capacitor, and suddenly, replicably, again and again, you get 50% increase in fermentation rate. The reason? It's an electric field that causes life. Even, the word Garden of Eden or Shem is in Shemon. These were all ancient words for simply knowing how to make the electric field that prevents aging and causing life.
So we have paradise on earth if we permit it to become paradise on earth, right?
Yes. And one of the ways you would know that paradise was setting in was all these stupid biology teachers who live in steel and aluminum buildings were moving out of those buildings which are electrically poisonous to every living thing. That's how you'd know that paradise was setting in.
Or your personal doctor telling you not to vaccinate your child, but that's another aspect of paradise.
Well, yes. But, maybe. But in this case specifically, we're defining the electric field that causes life, and therefore architecture, and therefore peacemaking. And once you know that, then your biology teacher has to move, because their steel and aluminum building is poisonous by the very definition of life. It's a bad capacitor. The way I want to just emphasize this, the definition of architecture, goldenmean.info/architecture, if I may.
Of course.
Look, here's how you decide whether or not an architect or a biologist should get a paycheck. You measure their building. If that building in the center, you take a capacitor, the Callahan probe, for example, if you measure harmonic inclusiveness in that capacitor, then that building will cause a seed to germinate and a human to have bliss and an immune system. And then that biologist or architect should get a paycheck. If, however, in that building you measure harmonic exclusiveness, which you will if it's steel or aluminum because it excludes harmonics, that has eliminated charge distribution, and that that architect should not get a paycheck because they're too stupid to know how to make life.
But in the past, probably those brilliant minds and biologists did get a paycheck, but after they found out, they got fired and didn't have any paycheck anymore.
I'm recommending that we fire every biologist and architect on this planet who does not know how to make the electric field that causes life, and that we do it soon.
Okay, one other aspect, because you're talking about the electric field, and of course, I think you mean this in a relationship to the ether physics, because not
to interrupt you here, but
well,
in my view, the word ether, for example, the way Steiner used it, is just an imprecise word for the dielectric field of capacitance. So you have a weak electric field that propagates most efficiently by phase conjugation, and calling that ether can be helpful, but sometimes you need to be more precise in your terms. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what about the terms zero-point energy and the vacuum in relation to this comment?
The 0 point is a name for the charge compression that happens at Planck distances, where the superluminal phase velocities are concentrated by Golden ratio.
Okay. Well, you just talked about DNA also, and of course, like I said a few days ago, I had a fascinating talk with Glenn Ryan about his experiments, and I also write about his work and your work also in my book, and also the work of Garyaev and Proponin. So what's your view on DNA? Because I know you also discuss a lot about DNA and the potential of trying to influence this blueprint. Well, maybe the energetic blueprint is the water surrounding it, but to influence for the better of mankind and for health, of course, throughout vibrational methods. So can you comment on that, on the work of DNA?
Well, thank you for asking fun questions. Glenn Ryan is a great friend, and I'm the guy who talked him into measuring the effect on DNA of EKG coherence. In addition, I was the guy who defined EKG coherence. But it was brilliant the way he measured the presence of the enzyme responsible for the zipper to prove that the rate of braiding in DNA increases with coherent EKG. That was wonderful. We wrote that up all at goldenmean.info/holarchy. But as for Peter Garyaev, he's a good friend who was with us in the Budapest conferences at my suggestion, and a wonderful biologist. And he had some genius there measuring the effect that, not only would the DNA's electric field bend a radio beam, but basically you move the DNA and it leaves a little black hole that still bends a radio beam.
The DNA phantom effect, you mean? Yeah.
But he's a great guy, and he has some ideas for how to use that. But the physics is actually beyond him, and I'm not picking on him. I like him. He's a great guy. And his biology background is fabulous. And I'd really like to help sponsor him in the rest of Europe and the world. He's kind of stuck there in Russia. There's a wonderful lady who's helping him in London. We could arrange communication if you guys like. But so back to the point here. Look, DNA's central rung is a hydrogen bond at the center of the golden ratio rectangle of the DNA rung ladder. And there's a tornado going down that field effect called getting a soul, and it's phase conjugate implosive, and therefore a device that makes and couples with gravity. DNA is one of the most magical, profound, wonderful things to study electrically, but that's the key word. Most of your damn genetic engineers don't even know that the DNA has an electric field. Oops. Not to mention that electric field determines whether you survive death. So these genetic engineers, it's not that engineering DNA is evil. No. It's that it's evil to engineer DNA if you don't know what DNA is for. That's what's evil. And if you don't know the DNA has an electric field, then you damn well shouldn't be messing with it. Anyway, so, you prove all these things by looking at what DNA is doing as a phase conjugator or as a dielectric. And basically, DNA is a device to move large-scale electric fields. And the more you recursively braid DNA in the presence of human bliss, the more it becomes phase coherent to longer and longer wavelengths of charge. And that's the physics of dowsing or feng shui, for example. So the way you get a soul is your DNA recursively braids, phase conjugates piezoelectrically, embeds, implodes, the plot thickens, and you bend longer and longer waves. And eventually you get to do something useful like bending a star. By the way, my entire shtick on the DNA story, goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. I put all the animations, the whole shtick is there.
Okay, great. So the general listeners can check that also. So can you explain for the general listeners your concept of, because I think it's a very important one relating to everything you've said just so far, the concept of perfect embedding and nesting. What do you mean with that exactly?
You're asking the fun questions. No, even any Feng Shui teacher knows that perfect nesting or embedding basically defines Feng Shui. But what they didn't know is that the same perfect nesting or embedding defines electric field theory. Mm-hmm. So basically, constructive distribution of charge, perfected nesting or embedding, which defines life in electric field theory, defines Feng Shui. Hello? That's why, for example, a right angle or a sharp corner is called evil in Feng Shui, because the electric field that comes off a 90-degree angle is not phase conjugate. Mm. And so it doesn't create nesting or embedding. It doesn't create golden ratio. Another simple example, the reason every living plant that's green spits out every green photon, cannot eat it, is because the angle of the donut-shaped photon we call green is at a 90-degree phase angle, and therefore it can't be absorbed. Hello?
This is also relating to the important fact, I believe it's in your books as well, in your work, the distribution of those leaves of a plant so they can have optimum light absorption, so to speak. Am I right?
Yes, although that's certainly an old but very important idea. It isn't my idea, certainly. But, perfect distribution, it's called maximum exposure, minimum superposition, which is the definition of how a tree leaf maximizes sunlight by Fibonacci golden ratio. But even the import of that, defining beauty, for example, is ultimately electrical. That is, namely, how you get a golden ratio perfected distribution. The perfect way to share. Very Christ-like idea.
Okay, so isn't the big problem for science in general, but especially, of course, medicine and the criticisms on so-called alternative medicine, well, it should be the other way around, that all the scientists look upon life as a biochemical thing, while it's a universal living energy being more electric, electromagnetic, and magnetic, so to speak?
That's right. You really understand the principle of life only by looking at field theory. Good way to start is the measurements of what survives the human body as an electric field after death. And if you had any clue about that, you damn well would not go to a hospital, because those places are proof that your medical people don't have a clue what life is. You got steel, aluminum, electrosmog, and dead air. So the modern Western hospital is the perfect example of a device to prevent life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this would be a nice addition to the work of Raymond Moody. I've had him in the show, and I think it would be interesting for him as well, because he's also studying now of course, he's famous for the near-death experience, but he's now doing so-called shared death experience. So that's a fascinating concept. So the people who are nearby, but who are, of course, are still living, have shared death experiences while at their presence. So this might relate to some of the concept you're talking about now.
Ray Moody has done some great stuff. I had the privilege of working with, who's that? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross I was with a few times. And Daniel Brinkley knew him a bit. Daniel Brinkley, he had the lightening up his DNA for his near-death experience, and we know what that does. It makes your DNA a superconductor. It's why he could feel everybody's emotion by touching them after. But the physics, I think a good introduction to the physics of death, and we wrote this up at goldenmean.info/immortality, was, in the Heinrich Clouvet form constants, the geometry seen by people as they die, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, that sequence repeated, is specifically the sequence of the folding operations of your DNA. Now, that's a beautiful clue to telling you how your biologic plasma is being prepared for distribution, the definition of immortality at death. Now, the idea of sharing that is beautiful. It's sort of like Highlander, there can be only one. When one dies, the next Highlander feels the charge. And so I felt my mother die, actually. And it's wonderful. But what's happening is the plasma is looking for the nearest, best possible place to embed. Now, the Maori, they will go to the north tip of New Zealand after they die to jump into the fractal and attempt distribution. The Hopi would go to Old Arrivie until the U.S. government put in steel sewage pipes. But everyone's looking for simply sustainable distribution called fractal, what Castaneda called place of power. So again, it comes down to one simple principle, and that is biologic plasma has to inhabit a fractal or it dies. And that's a beautiful way to study the physics of successful death. And it's true that group work can contribute to that beautifully, as the Tibetans do, and I'm sure Raymond Moody's work is useful there.
Well, there are three things immediately come to mind. The last thing is now you say the Tibetans do, and the coincidence is we are going to the Himalayas ourselves for the first time, so I'm curious if that will resonate. The other thing is I saw the name Paul Laviolette coming up because you're talking about plasma. And the third thing, I saw a movie a few weeks ago called Avatar, which you probably know. And this also comes to mind because of the energy charge distribution after a survival or a good death, so to speak, as you said. So any comments on this spontaneous associations I'm getting?
Well, I wrote up my analysis of the physics of the movie Avatar, goldenmean.info/avatar. In brief, it's the tree structure that produced bliss. And when people embed properly in the tree structure, they can participate. If they don't, they die. But in terms of the Tibetan story, they were using a drum sequence to get people into the phase discipline to remember how to navigate their plasma when they die. In terms of Paul Laviolette, he calls it subquantum kinetics. I've been in conversation with him even recently for many years. I think he's a great scientist. I like Paul Laviolette. I think he's still in Greece, actually. But his book, Galactic Superwave, etc., he's getting close to talking our language with the idea of phase conjugation and fractality. But, his discussion of plasma alignments and how the galaxy works is just deep and wonderful and fascinating. So, yeah.
Okay. One more, I might say more general question, but which also came out of these the discussion we're now having. What's your view on resonance, entrainment, and coherence and the interrelationship between them? Because in my opinion, they seem to explain a lot of phenomena.
Yeah, well, remember, I'm the first one to measure coherence in a second-order power spectra, and that's why I'm credited with inventing the word heart coherence. I use the cepstrum. In my invention, the heart tuner, which is now called thelovetuner.com.
Okay.
But coherence perfected is fractal. Here is why it's charge distribution perfected. And so, resonance or entrainment are just introductions to that basic idea. And a phase conjugate dielectric or phase conjugation in general, for example, phase conjugate optics, this is the only place physics has ever observed self-organization. And that is precisely a good introduction to how phase conjugate golden ratio plasma charge, whether optics, dielectrics, acoustics, hydrodynamics, it doesn't matter. It's the only source of all centripetal and self-organizing forces. That is the central principle.
And its self-organization, is that directly or maybe even causal related to self-similarity, but even self-healing, perhaps?
Yes, that self-similarity, or I am that I am, or as above, so below, these are just introductions to the physics of what is a fractal. And once you understand that, then you understand how compression becomes successful, and that's the form of all forms of self-organization. Let's give an example. When the biophysicist Dan Burish is observing life appear to self-organize as an electric wave in front of him, he calls it the Ganesh particle. It looks like a rose, It's what the Sumerians called ME, as in Me Asa Uru, their term for computer disk. They were looking at the electric field that caused life, and they were looking at how charge finds its only way to be compressed. The definition, for example, of the word chem, which is the origin of the word alchemy and chemistry, is simply that access to the black hole made possible by that phase conjugate fractal.
Talking about charge, what is the relationship between the concept of charge, your concept of charge, and what you call the life force, and maybe even relating to polarity, of course?
Yes, in my opinion, field is a name for a cloud of compressible material, the unified substance of the unified field. And when that compressible material is centripetal or centrifugal, compression versus rarefaction, that is called plus and minus charge. Because those waves of charge store inertia, for example, in rotation, that then defines mass. And the period of that rotation defines time. So all frames of space-time, inertial rotation, is defined by rotating charge. And when you superpose axes of symmetry of rotating charge, 1, 2, 3, and more, that's the definition of the term dimensions.
Okay, and what is a good explanation for the general listener? What exactly is spin symmetry?
When a wave wants to survive, it rotates. It's the origin of spin. It's the only way in which any wave survived in the charge of the ether. A cloud of charge is sometimes called plasma when it has a centripetal moment, like your aura, for example. And what did you say, the origin of spin? Yes.
The spin symmetry, yes.
Yes. That wave will not survive unless it rotates. In rotation, it will not survive unless the wavelength divides evenly into the circumference. That is the origin and reason that geometry exists, and that's the origin and reason that quantum mechanics exists. Simply that the wavelength had to divide evenly into circumference. That's the origin of geometry and quantum mechanics.
And also relating to musical theory and music of the spheres and subharmonics, like the harmonic overtones the Tibetan lamas are producing, because it seems like if I see the pictures of your work with all the geometries, it looks like as if it's a constructive interference effect, but also like a harmonic overtone scale. Is there some resemblance to that?
Yes, I would just like to, yes, of course, but I would just like to comment that the whole field of music and musical analysis is hopelessly and pathetically stuck.
Yes.
Because they do not understand that powers of two octave ratios produce maximum destructive wave interference. That's why the whole music theory and harmonics and overtones is pathetically stuck. When they realize that only golden ratio actually allows constructive wave interference, they're going to have to reinvent music theory, starting with teaching people how to sing. You know, if you want to produce dissociation in humans, use octaves, produce harmonics in their ears, binaural beat therapy, you produce dissociation. When you change that ratio to golden ratio of Fibonacci, then you produce bliss. So, you know, the fact that every musical instrument and musical theorist on planet Earth only uses octaves is an indication of tremendous stupidity.
So how would we change that for healing through music?
Well, you know, the Flecktones invented a golden ratio instrument. The fact that you can't make golden ratio on today's keyboard tells you something about perversion.
So I have to totally adapt my music studio here in a golden ratio. You have to tell me in private more on the practical consequences of that. It will take too much time.
Let me just give you a quick example, if I may. So when you make a computer play golden ratio, and by the way, the key signature is Planck, that's the secret. But when you teach a computer to play golden ratio, everybody in the room feels nausea, sickness. If you teach a choir to sing those same harmonics, everyone in the room feels bliss. Meditate on that one.
I will. In the meantime, I want to ask you, this is not for the general audience, but if you like, I would like to consider a proposal of making a golden ratio healing CD with you, and you don't have to answer that, but at least I've asked the question. So what about love, compassion, and bliss and emotions in general? I have to tell you honestly, as a neuropsychologist, I just found out that it's not biochemical. Science is looking at it in the wrong direction, and no psychologist knows what love is anyway. So I thought it's all vibration input being translated in a holographic way through the senses. And of course, normal neuropsychologists don't regard the input like this or even conscious like that. But I know that you talk about love and compassion and bliss and emotions. So in your view, what is their role? Do they attract charge or do they do something else?
I would like to suggest that the neuroscientists study the electrical engineering measurements while observing a shaman steering a tornado. So what you observe is the shaman says, I'm feeling the pain of the tornado now. I'm feeling compassion. And then if you watch electrically, you'll see the bioplasmic streamers of the shaman embed, and the shaman's electric field, aura, plasma, will become the center of gravity of that tornado, called falling in love. And then the tornado is following the shaman around. His centripetal force is the navigating function. Once you start to study plasma theory, you have the possibility of understanding the nature of compassion and love and how field effects are steered.
So we have to go from fatal attraction to fractal attraction, so to speak.
Embedding that you make the centripetal force. So when the shaman says, I'm feeling the pain of the tornado, and remember, all of physics is only tornado string theory wormholes. And so if you can steer one tornado, you can steer everything physics can talk about. But when the shaman says, I'm feeling the pain, what he means is he feels that part of the tornado's plasma field which is bleeding from fractality departure. So pain is defined as that part of your plasma field which is not fractal and therefore bleeding charge. You repair the fractal, namely the compression of charge. You eliminate pain, as in Elizabeth Rauscher's phase conjugate magnetic. So once you understand what pain is, charged plasma biofields that bleed charge due to lack of fractality, you can fix it. And suddenly you discover the opposite of pain, which is perfect embedding. And then when you nest perfectly in something that's embeddable, you call that falling in love. Remember, you only fall in love with pure intention. What that means is that only that which has a perfectly distributable wave is ultimately worth embedding in, because from that you can gain inertia.
So how do we create perfect embedding medicine? Is it just to be able to feel love and to experience love, or is there more?
Well, a simple example. You got the little kid. You're trying to teach him what love is. You say, well, over here we have a city full of steel buildings and electrosmog and pain. Now, over on this other side, I have a tiny little village of natives, and they're living in African architecture in a village that is precisely fractal. Now, where should that child go to try to fall in love? You do not want to attempt to embed yourself in a steel building because it is fatal to do so, because you can't implode charge there. Whereas if you walk over to that ancient African village that is precisely fractal, the village looks like a pine cone and the houses do, and the altar in the house, it's called fractality in African architecture, Ronnie Glass. In that place, your aura can grow. So step one is learn where to fall in love.
Okay. And you are saying, and I love this quote, only love creates. But in a simple sense, can you explain why is it that only love creates?
Well, the actual sort of Sufic phrase was, only love bends the light, therefore only love creates. And you see, only perfect embedding makes a fractal, and only that bends the light. And only that fractality causes charge compression, which is the physics definition of what creation is.
Okay. Well, talking about love in life, what in your view is the difference between, and I think this is an important concept, and you're talking about this a lot, of course, and writing about it. What's the difference between living water and dead water? And I mean in and outside our bodies, and hopefully you can relate to the memory of water and homeopathy as well, of course. So the difference between living water and dead water in your view.
The difference is the same as between living and dead air. It is charge distribution efficiency. In water, it's called redox. In air, it's as Karakov measured. So water in which charge distribution is efficient, you have laminar coherence, you have clathrid structures, you have charge distribution efficiency, and that's called life. Drink from this water and you will never thirst again. Thirst is hunger for a space in which to unpack charge. A tiny bit of water from a powerful spring is all you want. Yes. So you're looking for things into which to unpack your charge, the definition of fractal, and therefore definition of ground. And So living water is simple and easy to make once you understand that. Look at the imploder technology, goldenmean.info/self-organization.
So how do you, this is a spontaneous question coming up because this is such an important field of work and a lot of implications which would be great for humanity. So how would we successfully implement all this work? Can we do it collectively? Do we need just research fundings, or do we need to do it itself, or with a global consciousness kind of project? You're talking about the Heartbeat Earth project. I'm doing the World Peace Child project of resonance and coherence. Is there anything else? Do we have to get rid of the power structures, or do we just have to focus on just the good stuff? So what's keeping us from creating heaven on earth?
Hey Ave, the breath of charge which takes flight, as in Plains of Sharon, right? No. Well, I see the challenge as education primarily. I don't think we need to go around telling people they're evil. Maybe even I shouldn't be going around telling physicists they're stupid. But look, education means that we now are ready, and more people are helping us, and that's great. And let's build on this critical mass. But it's very simple. You can phase conjugate. You can make implosion or fractal fields. You can do it in hydrodynamics. See our implosive nozzle, goldenmean.info/self-organization. You can do it in magnetics. See phase conjugate magnetics, which I invented, where the like poles attract. Again, goldenmean.info/self-organization. And you can do it in dielectrics. The gold-coated ostrich egg with a phase conjugate dielectric resin, 50% increase in fermentation rate. You can do it in optics. The point is, we are now ready to produce a plasma, whether it's optically, dielectrically, magnetically, or hydrodynamically, which emerges from chaos from within, self-organization. The only way our planet will emerge from chaos, the definition of peacemaking. And that must be done in all these areas. And that research is simple, direct, clear, and it's not expensive. And anybody that wants to play with us, great, come and play, fractalfield.com. And it actually don't take a lot of money, and we got some help, and more is coming. So please, let's share this message.
Well, like I said to Glenn Ryan, let's hope I become a multimillionaire with the next CD project, and I want to help out as well. But talking about peace, you talk about the science of peace, and you also talk about the Heartbeat Earth project. And I think they might be related, but can you comment on what the projects are?
We started the harmonic module, which became the Heartbeat Earth project, which is now goldenmean.info/peace university and goldenmean.info/module. And we developed an international curriculum for teaching peacemaking as science at /peace university. And in summary, you can define peacemaking in the heart and in the planet and in the voice and in your EEG. It's all based on fractal golden ratio. That defines peace because it defines sustainable self-organization and all peacemaking, therefore. Where we implemented that was in the harmonic module, where, we have the measurements when millions of children sing the same song. The effect on the solar flares is dramatic. The sun goes, ha, and breathes a sigh of rest when 1 million children sing the same song. The physics is they make a centripetal force. So we intended, and I'm sure everyone is playing with this idea, that, 1 million and more hearts could phase lock. And we started on that project, and we're having lots of fun teaching hearts to phase lock. Definition, not just of heart coherence, but compassion by measurement. And so my heart tuner originally, which now is called thelovetuner.com, we're now in a 4 and 8 channel mode. We can do up to 32 people in one computer and thousands in IP to teach hearts to phase lock. And when that happens, as you know, it defines tantra, defines marriage counseling, it defines conflict resolution, and it defines peacemaking, and defines consensus process, because it defines the moment when two bodies phase lock, and therefore exchange charge. And that's the beginning of all peacemaking. So, yeah, if you want to play with this in biofeedback terms, measuring EKG phase lock, I have a lifetime experience, heart tuner, my invention, now thelovetuner.com. So, yeah, we're playing with that, and we're on the road, and our new version is Bluetooth wireless and going to be iPhone compatible.
Well, I have goosebumps now because you're talking about phase lock, and automatically this to me means synchronized and means resonance and coherence and entrainment, all these concepts we're talking about and which are so important. And I want to invite you to our website, not the HealingSoundMovement.com, which is another one, but the WorldPeaceChild.com. There's a single on there which was even, well, let's say it as it is, prophesied by someone, and I didn't even know if that was becoming true, but it became true when we were in the temples of Egypt and we got this cosmic download, so to speak. The song is called Prayer for the Children, and this is our global initiative for world peace through song and vibration and entrainment and coherence and global consciousness, so to speak. So I'm getting a lot of goosebumps with your Heartbeat Earth project explanation.
It sounds beautiful, John. We should play together more. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah, well, sounds good. And at worldpeacechild.com you can hear that song, Pray for the Children, and HealingSoundMovement.com is my general website, together with my wife, who's a singer and dancer, and she sings on those projects, and you can listen to the other music as well.
Wonderful. I'd love to get together sometime. You're up there in Amsterdam. Let's play. We're down here in South France, travel a lot. Let's connect sometime.
Yeah, we're quite near, so that's amazing. Well, thank you for that invitation. So you have a very important, in my view, you have a unique view. I'm writing a new book on free energy and anti-gravity, and it seems to me that you have a unique view on inertia and gravity. So what does this teach us while we are on the subject on inertia and gravity? What's your view on gravity?
Well, my view on inertia is not new. It's simply inertia defines mass, and we know that rotating charge is the origin of that inertia. So my view in that regard is not new. My new view on gravity is a little bit new to people who haven't thought about it. Gravity means the G-ray of Vita, the G-ray of life, which is how charge makes a G circle the line. And basically, when charge moves in a way that's golden ratio or phase conjugate, as, for example, in DNA, the adding and multiplying of the phase velocities using golden ratio makes that constructive, and that turns compression into acceleration. And that's the cause of all gravity. That's why hydrogen is golden ratio, because the phase velocities have to add and multiply by golden ratio. And that's the only reason hydrogen has gravity. And that's the only reason DNA makes black holes. So once you understand how gravity is made, you can stabilize it, and therefore stabilize things like atmosphere. So yes, we're very much in the process of building capacitors that make gravity. It's not complicated. It's quite simple. Once you understand the physics, it's not even expensive. All other forms of thrust are obsolete. Let's get with the program here. It's simply a matter of taking responsibility for what holds our ecosystem together.
It is especially important, this last sentence, because being cheap doesn't necessarily being very like a nice invitation to someone who wants to make a lot of money. Sometimes the cheap solution is a problem for power structures, and of course we have to be responsible for a better world and create paradise on Earth, but then we have to have this willingness, so to speak, to do it the right way and not just the profitable way. That's my opinion, but so does your fractality work relate in any form to Bruce Lipton's work or Muller's work on global scaling?
Bruce Lipton is one of my oldest friends. He's cool. He taught me animation, did some rituals with us in Pennsylvania years ago. Okay. And his work on membrane-mediated fractality in the membrane is beautiful. The thing is, I don't think he actually gets that makes an electric field that's fractal and therefore centripetal, or how that works electrically. His field is biology. But he's great. He's a great one to be used to introduce my work, which is deeper. I mean, a phase conjugate dielectric and why it's bioactive is something that's beyond Bruce yet, but hopefully he'll get there. Who was the other person? Oh, you mentioned Hartmut Muller. Hartmut Muller really tried hard with global scaling, was all beautiful. And then he tried to create communications devices. But I don't think he actually took it as far as seeing the cause of gravity and all self-organization. But he went a long way and really tried hard.
Okay.
By the way, I wrote up my summary of the global scaling movement and comments on Hartmut at goldenmean.info/global scaling. And, if he had known what Nassim recently discovered, the golden ratio behind all the scaling law of matter, the Schwarzschild condition, the new mass of the proton, it would have been a breakthrough for Hartmut.
Okay. It's amazing, by the way, that every time you name goldenmean.info/something, I'm laughing over here because I've seen those, the info on this, which comes after the slash, and it's whole books on subjects. So I want to tell the listeners that just don't check goldenmean.info. Check all this information after the slashes and you come to the whole universe of knowledge, I want to say. But there was one thing you sent me a few weeks ago, just I believe a general mail, about Monsanto. But I'm not sure what it was about the genetic seeds or something. But anything you want to comment about that news briefing?
Yes. It's convenient to have a whipping boy, but if there's ever any embodiment of evil on this planet, I think it's Monsanto. And every village needs a scapegoat.
I was afraid you want to say me, but you're saying Monsanto. That's good. Okay.
No. Monsanto brought you Agent Orange. They brought you aspartame poisoning. They brought you monoculture, which is the death of all DNA. And now Monsanto brings you the death of the bees. But that article is fractalfield.com/save the bees. Which has been reprinted all over the world. And basically, it just showed the mechanism of how Monsanto managed to kill the bees, which was that when they put the bacteria Thuringiensis Bt gene spliced excerpt into the GMO corn, then when the bee eats the pollen from that corn, has a small immune reaction, which in the summer does not kill it, but in winter consumes the protein, loses the ability to learn, and gets lost and cannot make it back to the beehive. The science is all there, so we now know how the Monsanto mistake GMO corn killed the bees. Please spread that information. The bees didn't die in Brazil until Brazil was stupid enough to let in the GMO corn from Monsanto. Mexico made a rule that Monsanto's GMO corn could not come in, but it got in there anyway. The whole country got wiped out because of the pollen drift. Now Australia still has live bees until if they're stupid enough to let in the GMO corn.
And does it also relate to the electromagnetic pollution, so to speak, of wireless internet and mobile phones and so on?
Actually, some disorientation is probably there, but there's no evidence actually directly that the microwave is the issue behind the bee death, in my view, having researched the death. I mean, there's lots of horrible things that come with living next to microwave towers, but you can find beehives next to them, and I don't think that's what's killing the bees, no. I absolutely agree that, those microwave frequencies are very destructive, and RF communication is very threatening to bliss, but that's not the particular issue at hand with the bee death here. I would like to say that as the wave of farmers committing suicide is rolling across India, the Indian government passed a law to make criticizing GMO illegal, the stupid dummies. Meantime, the GMO cotton that was supposed to improve the yield, in fact, takes 10 times more water if you want to make the cotton grow, and kills the soil microorganisms. It's called the Monsanto mistake.
What's the next thing? A vaccine against life?
Well, the thing is, people really need to wake up and understand how life is created, what that electric field looks like in principle. And that needs to start animating our international companies or we're toast. So again, our problem is, there's tens of thousands of employees at Monsanto who sincerely believe they're saving the earth, even though they're in fact killing it. The problem? Education.
Yeah, I just don't know. Yeah, okay.
They don't know what DNA is for.
Yeah, they call it junk DNA, and they just don't realize it's for...
Yeah, and it's not junk. In fact, what's called junk DNA is achieving this spacing to align the active sites so electric fields can embed, phase conjugate, and implode. So it's not junk.
So does that relate to the work of Leonard Horowitz also? I've had him in a show a month ago or something like that. But...
Well, he's a sweet guy, I think, and got global interest. But his stuff about 5 to 8 hertz was all childish and shallow and superficial science, sadly. His whole thing on 8 hertz is just stupid.
Okay, so, talking about the worldview we are in right now and all the possibilities we have and the opportunities and, of course, the challenge to be willing to create heaven on earth, how do we call the angels? That's the last thing I received from you, so I thought it was fascinating. Calling the angels.
Yeah, that's goldenmean.info/ophanim, O-P-H-A-N-I-M. And it's the physics of the origin of Ophanic and Nochian, John Dee's work, physics of alchemy, origin of Greek. It basically, let me see if I can do a quick summary in 1 minute here. The higher order alphabets, like Hebrew and Sanskrit, are the physics of plasma residues. You take a little bit of the shadow of the electric field on the donut, and the trace of that shadow is called the alphabet letter. In the case of Ophanim Enochian, you get the shadows of how vortex cones phase conjugate, which is how angels get bodies. Specifically, when you enact that sequence of symmetry operations, the angel Gabriel, which is the origin of Christianity, Mormons, and the Muslims, Gabriel is basically teaching us the physics of the symmetry set, Ophanim Enochian, the alphabet of angels, for how to embed your plasma in a larger electric field until the plasma is the size of stars, which is how angels have bodies, which is why we can steer the sun if we grow up. So read the article. It's really about understanding. Look, these higher elemental beings, starting with the gnomes and elementals, but in the higher levels, the angels, they're right that we are drunk and stupid for not calling them. And the way you call them is their language, which, just like the runes, the wave guide into the mind of the ancient shaman, that wave guide is a certain sequence of symmetry vortex. You learn their language, you can become part of their bodies as plasma. And that's where your aura can go.
Is this also a bit related to Jonathan Goldman? He was the last one on the show with his work of trying to use frequency plus intention, and the power of visualization plus vocalization is manifestation to create a vortex, a bilingual or a bidirectional communication between the higher realms and between our bodies, being an embodiment of these angelic realms through invocation through sound?
Well, yes, it's true. The sound is part of the unified field. It's a compression rarefaction of charge in a certain bandwidth. And Jonathan is trying hard. He's a sweet guy, an old friend. Eventually we can look deeper into the physics here, but that's a good introduction.
Okay. So how do you view, when we're on the subject, how do you view the future of mankind, especially in relationship to the so-called multidimensional world and the cosmic attunement which we could have and maybe ought to have as humanity?
Well, remember, to be multidimensional means only that your aura, plasma field, bubble of charge can rotate in the next superposed axes of symmetry. And that only happens past 3 using golden ratio, which means that your aura is not going to get big unless you get fractal. Otherwise, you get dead. So another way of saying that in sort of psychological terms is, look, if you're not remembering your dreams, chances are you're not going to take much through death because you're not learning how to steer your plasma by being centripetal. This corrective steps, make a magnetic map of your bed and do yoga and diet so your aura gets big, and eventually you'll learn where to take your aura when you dream and when you die. And that will tell you if you got multidimensional. And that's the only future for humanity.
So humanity now, in a broad sense, it's too stupid to be able to live in a proper way, but we also have to learn how to die in a good way.
Well, death was only an excuse to learn to propagate your aura. And once you can do that, that's the only form immortality ever took, which defines bliss, the body polis, and politics, and therefore government. The ability to get auras big enough to become immortal. So basically, if you haven't learned how to live a life to attract charge, then you haven't learned what life is for yet.
And I think the fractality and the golden mean ratio is essential in relating to all the stuff we just talked about, right?
Yeah. Thank you for your patience with my enthusiasm.
Well, thank you for this great conversation. Anything you want to add or anything you want to talk about regarding work you're doing now or want to do in the future?
Well, we appreciate your support. If people are interested in some DVDs, fractalfield.com, goldenmean.info, and we have these wonderful tours of Europe coming. Come and play with us. If you're interested in the Imploder, you can check it out at goldenmean.info/self-organization. So you can join us and play with this. We have more and more scientists who are realizing they're seeing the light. So come and join us. This is called critical mass. It's very attractive. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Well, I'm one of those organizers here in Holland, and I want to invite you all over, and we'll talk about that in practicality, meeting each other, but I want to do something which comes from the heart, but connects to the concept of entrainment and coherence and intention and the multidimensional world, but also the holographic world, but through vibration and through compassion, because we just don't have to believe now. It's not religion, it's not sectarian, it's science. We can actually see that love, compassion, and intention, used with visualization and vocalization, can actually be used to achieve magical, we would call it magical or occult, but now it's practical and humanitarian, so to speak, effects, affecting reality and affecting life and creating peace on earth, right? So that's what I want to do.
Oh, that's beautiful, John. Well said. Really well said. I'm glad you're here. Thank you, sir.
Well, likewise, and thank you for this great conversation. It was an absolute personal honor, and well, I hope we can speak some more in private soon. HealingSoundMovement.